Welcome to the October Founders Live Influencer Series. I'm Christina Brennan, and this is my colleague Bryan Rutberg from
Hello.
3C Communications. And today we have Don't Be Goldilocks, being effective and just right in a medium, large, or small room. So basically, we're going to give you a few tips on how to work different size rooms, including how conversational you should be, the physicality on stage, how you should project your voice or maybe not project your voice, as well as some visual aids, props, and all the fun stuff that goes into presenting. So let's kick it off with the conversation. What style do you suggest for the small boardroom, kind of like we're in right now?
When we're in a small room, I like to make it as conversational as possible. I figure that generally, if you're making a presentation in a small room, there's an expectation that you're going to engage the audience. We always coach to engage the audience anyway, but I mean really engaging, like asking periodically, you like where I'm going with this? Does this make sense to you? Are there any questions at this point? Or even better, to build in places into your presentation where you actually ask the audience for their feedback or some help. Maybe leaving an open-ended question somewhere in your material and getting them to respond to you in a way that helps you guide through the rest of your presentation.
Right. Plus, it helps with retention, right? Most of the time that we're presenting, we're trying to educate
Right.
at least one or two topics. So I think getting them involved and getting them to almost kind of give it back to you a little bit. Or I love when you talk about, setting up to where the question that comes from the audience is just like right where you're going. And like you said, just keeps that flow going.
Exactly. What about medium rooms or big rooms?
Things you can use some of the same tactics, right? Asking the questions, but then it becomes maybe more rhetorical. Maybe it's a show of hands rather than asking for a specific answer. Or something I've seen you do as well as the parent share.
Right.
That's a good one, I think. Again, getting them thinking about it with their attention, but you're not obligated to engaging every single person. Basically, you just say the audience, you're talking about topic XYZ. Real quick, I want you guys to kind of start talking about this. Turn to your neighbor and discuss for a minute. Then after a minute, let them know, okay, switch. Now you say your side of things. And then maybe you call on 3 or 4 people and can you share what you guys discussed and what came out of it, and then use that again to lead to your next topic.
And again, that helps with comprehension because they're struggling with this issue too, and retention because it forces them to put your concept into their words and make them feel it at a human level that you couldn't get if you were just talking and telling stories. Right. So let's go. You've got an idea of how to handle conversation and connecting with an audience verbally. What about physicality? I think in a small room, generally you want to be yourself, right? You might have some gestures that you build in if you're not normally a gestures person, but you're going to keep them relatively close to the body. You're going to make them appear very natural. What about when you get into bigger spaces?
The bigger the room gets, the bigger your gestures should get. You're going to feel silly because it's not natural. You wouldn't do that in a small room in your day-to-day life. Promise you though, and the stage is huge, you're small. Get as big as you can. Take up that space.
So this is the difference between speaking in a conference room or maybe a classroom and speaking in an auditorium. It's going from, if you've got 8 or 10 people, it's just like a cocktail party. If you've got 20 or 30 or 40 people, you might be a little more dramatic. And if you've actually got a room where, say, maybe you're presenting at a conference or a trade show, and you've got to reach the very back of the room, and there could be 100 or 200 or 500 people in it, you're going to be more expressive. You're going to put your arms out this wide instead of this wide. You're going to bring yourself up to your full height. You're going to make sure that even in the back of the room, they get it. And honestly, if you think about going to see a play, for example, those exaggerated gestures from the stage, they don't seem exaggerated to the audience. So it does get you over that concern that you might look like an idiot. In fact, I think once I wrote there's a blog post on our website. It's like, don't sound like an idiot. Oh, wait, sound like an idiot. And it's all about how to prepare to go on stage and doing vocal exercises. But same thing is, don't look like an idiot. Oh, wait, maybe look a little like an idiot if it's a big room because you're the only one who's going to feel self-conscious about it.
That's a perfect segue to
It is.
your voice and projecting.
See how we did that? It's a perfect segue. Go ahead. Tell us
like
about your voice.
Planned this
Almost like we planned it.
This is something you might even notice. He's just naturally projecting his voice more than I am. So say I was in a big room, I'm going to really have to push myself out of my comfort zone and really work to project and not just be louder, but there's like how you push it out of your body almost,
Yes.
right? You say from the stomach or from the diaphragm rather than all here.
Yes.
And again, you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm yelling, but you're not. Especially if it's not your natural, you almost have to go even further than you would think just to be where you should be.
When you're talking about your vocal levels, it's sort of conversational when you're in a small room in terms of how you connect with people. But I'd say in order to demonstrate ownership of the room, in order to keep the power dynamic for you as the speaker, even in a small room, you're going to want to bring your voice up a little and make sure it's coming from a place where you're getting some resonance. A little bit more in a medium room, and in a large room, man, you really have to project. You've got to make sure they hear you in the back without making it sound like you're screaming. And we all know the difference between screaming and just projecting. And when you get into a bigger room, it's where you start to work on your microphone skills and making sure that if it's a handheld, you're talking right into it with your mouth just a couple of inches away, if that. And if it's a stationary mic, relatively the same thing. And if it's a lav mic, well, then you just sort of talk in a normal speaking voice as you might in a small room, knowing it's going to be amplified. So we've talked about how you talk with folks, how you act physically, what happens with your voice. The last thing is what happens with everything else around you, your props, your slides, your visual aids.
I think something that's really unique with a small room that you can't quite do, or you can't do as well in a bigger room, is if you have any of those props or any sort of handouts, stuff that you can actually put into somebody's hand, you have a little bit more of an advantage. You don't see that as much though with handouts and stuff these days. Everything's electronic, right? So I think honestly though your deck's not too much different. If you're working from a standard deck, I don't think you have too many differences in a smaller, large room. Maybe you have a chance to incorporate, video and sound if you're in a full production room versus let's all hover around my laptop around the conference room. But if you have those different tools available to you, think about that as you're preparing your deck. Think about what technology you do have available and take advantage of it.
This actually gets, that is a good segue to a somewhat broader point about stagecraft and production, if you will. When I was working as a corporate speechwriter, we would handle things like webinars or small groups one way, but when we had really big trade shows or sales kickoff events, any place where the executive I was serving was in a really big room and had to carry a lot of the content from the main stage for what could sometimes be a multiple hour session with her team or a third-party team, we would do full-on productions. We would change things up through the course of a couple hours in a way that you don't when you're using a small room. We would have her stand on stage and do introduction to the topic and get her half hour of content in, and then we'd bring out a customer or a business partner as a guest and have a one-on-one conversation, or bring in a panel and have it facilitated by my executive. We would go out and we would do video production in order to have videos that could be shown on a big screen. Once we even put together with the executive's core leadership team a song and dance routine that really entertained an audience of rank and file, because it was all of their execs having a little bit of fun and frankly making a little bit of fun of themselves and showing that they weren't too serious. You can't do that in a small room or a medium room. But as soon as you get the opportunity, should it come your way and should you desire it, to get in front of a big room, start thinking broadly about you not having to do all the work, but bringing in helpers and friends and video content in a way that you might not if all you're trying to do is get through an hour in front of your boss and a team in your conference room at the office.
When you were going through that, I actually thought about webinars and stuff. We didn't really plan on talking about that, but that is another type of room. I think you use a lot of the same tactics as the small room, and you have to be a little bit more expressive with your voice.
Yes.
So even though you may not be on camera and have people looking at you, I'd still use those hand gestures that you're planning on using. And it might feel silly, but you might still point at the things on your screen, or maybe you're moving the mouse to, work for that. But that's definitely something that's happening more and more now. It's the online presentation.
When you're doing a presentation, when you're doing something online like a webinar, first you've got to consider whether you've got the camera on or off. But even if you're having a conversation with one person that you're trying to impress or get information from or share information with, early in my professional career, I worked as an inside sales representative for Hewlett Packard, a big computer company. And throughout our inside sales center, every one of us in our cubicles had a mirror up. And it was a reminder that if you're smiling, just as Christina's doing now, if you're smiling, it comes across in your voice and you actually sound to the other person more approachable. Now, how much more is that the case if, like we do now, you've got a camera on you and you're talking to a whole group of people who may or may not have cameras on as well, but they sure as heck are looking at you because you're running the webinar. So make sure you're smiling. Make sure you show ownership of the event, in this case, the webinar, with your voice by being a little above your normal tone. And as Christina says, use those gestures, bring them out because they're looking at you. And even if they're just listening, you're amping yourself up when you put the fist or the finger into it.
Can I add a bonus?
Add a bonus, and then we want to tell them where we are today.
Yeah, I definitely got to say thank you to Atlas. Quick bonus, though, would be what happens if you're planning on presenting to 200 at a conference or something, but only 15 people show up to your session?
Been there.
Yeah, me too.
You get to say, hey, I thought we might have a room full. Turns out it's just a small group of you. I'm excited to really engage with you and get to know you better and understand why you're here. You might even start the presentation by saying, tell me why you showed up today, because now that I've got the chance, I want to address your specific concerns, issues, questions, right? You've got to use it for the opportunity it is, and later you can go home and cry in your soup, but
and learn from it, right?
And learn from it.
Yeah,
tell them where we are.
So the big thank you to Atlas Workbase down on 500 Mercer Street. If you're in Seattle, you definitely want to come check them out. They've got events all the time, so that's a fun way to come in and check them out. But it's really great for just touchdown work, meetings. They've got all the fixings, including snacks.
Comfortable chairs, tasty snacks, and good places to have meetings with clients, colleagues, and a really friendly staff.
Yeah, and super central, so it's pretty easy to get anywhere that you need to in the Seattle area from here. So.
Uptown, downtown, or Belltown, as we like to say.
All
Not to
towns.
mention South Lake Union, all the towns, right? Hey, we'll see you over on the Ask Me Anything chat if you happen to be watching live today. Otherwise, you can go check out the archives and